Hello fellow bibliophiles and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. So on my 3-year Booktube anniversary I did a Q&A and Claudia from Spinster's Library asked me a great question. She asked, what's a book that you ended up loving that you would not have picked up if not for Booktube? And I thought about it and I realized that this was not a simple answer. This was a whole new video idea. So I thought that today I would finally make that video. Over the past few years, my reading tastes and recommendations have changed and grown immensely, all thanks to Booktube. In the past, I would pick a book by just going to the library and seeing what was there, maybe reading the backs of the books or just a few pages of them and making a decision. I wasn't aware of nearly as many books as I am now. I owned very few books, and the library was where I would go when it was time to read something new. But since watching Booktube, and even more so since creating my channel, I suddenly have lists and lists of books that I can't wait to read based on videos that I watched or personal recommendations from other booktubers who I communicate with regularly. I've also acquired my own little library full of unread books, and it's just really fun to see how my reading has changed and expanded since Booktube, so I wanted to discuss some of the wonderful books that I would have never been aware of if not for Booktube. It will come as no surprise to those of you who watch my channel regularly, but the one person who has probably had the biggest impact in my reading life over the past few years has been Katie from Books and Things. She happens to share many of the same interests that I do in literature, and we very rarely disagree on a book. She's basically my reading soulmate. I credit her with introducing me to one of my favorite authors of all time, Diane Setterfield. And that's probably who I'd actually mention if you were to ask me who my favorite contemporary author is. I love Diane Setterfield's writing and the way that she weaves her stories together like no other author I know. Her books are somewhat realistic, but they also have a flair for the dark, twisted, and supernatural, without it overwhelming the entirety of her books. She is just such a talented and miraculous author, and I'm so thankful to Katie for having introduced me to her. I probably would have also never picked up Station 11 if it wasn't for Katie. It was very popular on Booktube, and I had heard plenty about it, but I wasn't sure that I would like it. People cited it as YA and dystopian fiction, which are both general buzzwords that I steer clear of in my reading. But Katie's love for it somehow convinced me to read it, and I absolutely loved this book. I suppose it is dystopian, but it's the most hopeful dystopian book that I've ever been exposed to. And the way all the characters' stories are connected by the end of the book is masterful. It's about so much more than a plague that wipes out 99% of the population. It's about the importance of art and the resilience of the human spirit. I'm so glad I read this book, and Katie has introduced me to so many more books than this, but these are just some of the highlights. The vast majority of what I read has either been mentioned by Katie at some point or is something that I discuss with her after reading. Something else that I would have never picked up if not for Booktube are the Discworld novels by Terry Pratchett. I've read 7 of these at this point, but I would have never picked them up if it weren't from Jean Bookish Thoughts. The books are about a disc-shaped planet balanced on the backs of 4 elephants, which in turn stand on the back of a giant turtle. There are witches, wizards, the character of death. It just sounds utterly ridiculous and not the type of thing that I like to read. But don't let the bizarre descriptions fool you. This is not your standard sci-fi or fantasy fare. Terry Pratchett is a master of comedic satire. His books poke fun at cliches and expectations and tackle important themes of religion, racial prejudice and exploitation, and the role of government, and so much more. I feel like the genius of these books is overlooked in so many circles, and it's actually hard to come by them around me. I have a whole spreadsheet about the reading order of this series and where I can get them around me for free, like which local library I'll need to go to, etc. I think that the next book in the series for me is Guards, which I've heard is a favorite of many people. So I'm not sure when I'll pick it up, but I am ever so slowly going through this massive series. And it really is massive. I think there are over 40 books in this series. So this is not something I'm going to finish in the next year or two, but this is a really long project for me, and I plan to read a few books by Terry Pratchett a year. The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock is another book that I don't know if I would have been aware of if it wasn't for Booktube. I'm not sure which channel I originally heard about this book on, but it was making the BookTube rounds at one point. I thought it was a phenomenal piece of historical fiction, and I feel like it's rare that I have the opportunity to read about the 18th century. The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock is about a merchant named Jonah Hancock who finds himself without the ship that he is used to making his livelihood off of. Instead, he has been presented with a mermaid, but it's a grotesque little creature, very different from the shiny, scaled, majestic creature you might conjure to mind when you hear the word mermaid. Word spreads of Jonah's oddity, and his path crosses with a renowned courtesan, Angelica Neal, the most captivating woman that he has ever seen. The book is about the cost of ambition, gender expectations in the 18th century, and so much more, with a little spark of magical realism at the end. I did a whole review on this one, and I had so much to say about it, so I'm going to link that video for you guys down below. I think it's about a year ago now that I read it. So yes, do check that out if you're interested and haven't seen it yet. Another booktuber who has had a great influence on my reading in the past few years has been Kate Howe. Her love of Gaskell and mysteries have encouraged me to pick up Elizabeth Gaskell's works and Agatha Christie for the first time. Kate most notably raves about Wives and Daughters, which I loved despite reading North and South first. I've also since read Cranford, her first book, Mary Barton, and some of her shorter works, including the Moorland Cottage, Christmas Storms and Sunshine, and Lois the Witch. And I have her two other full-length novels on my shelves, Sylvia's Lovers and Ruth. So I do hope to read those at some point. Gaskell's writing has such a quaint and cozy feel to me, and her work breathes life into 19th century domesticity and tackles important themes of the fallen woman and workers' rights. And of course, Kate Howe's love of mysteries led me to pick up the queen of crime herself, Agatha Christie. I've read and loved Murder on the Orient Express, Murder at the Vicarage, and the ABC Murders so far. I'm always ready to curl up with a good Agatha Christie, and I think my next reads by her will be the two I have on my shelves. And then there were none. I have this very vintage-looking copy, which I'm excited to get to, and The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. So these two will definitely be my next Agatha Christie reads. And finally, another booktuber who has directly influenced my reading tastes is Acacia Ives. I don't know if I first heard about Shirley Jackson on her channel or if she just had the most compelling things to say about the author, but I associate Acacia with my reading of Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle and the biography of Shirley Jackson that I also read. Shirley Jackson's writing is peculiar and twisted and dark and wholly enjoyable. She writes captivating domestic Gothic fiction that features Jackson's unique blend of creepiness and wit. Shirley Jackson is a brilliant and underrated author, and I'd love to read more by her someday. Acacia also introduced me to a brilliant book called The Clay Girl. Her review of this book was so intriguing that I picked up the book from the library and devoured it. It's about an 8-year-old girl who, with the help of her imaginary seahorse friend, Jasper, copes with the aftermath of her father's suicide and her generally dysfunctional family. It's a coming-of-age story written like pure poetry with a magical sense of childlike wonder. I loved it so much that I bought this copy for myself after returning the library book, so that I could have it on my shelves as a reminder of how wonderful the book was and perhaps reread it again when I feel like it. These were just some of the most notable booktube influences I've had in my reading life over the past few years, but honestly, lately, it's hard to tell if the next book I pick up is influenced by a fellow booktuber or is just something I'm drawn to. Almost everything I decide to read is based on someone's recommendation, whether I'm consciously aware of it or not. The book options are just never ending, and literally, I have what I call my never-ending TBR list, which is just a list on the Evernote app of any book I hear about that I'm interested in reading. And I write down next to each book which local library I can find the book in. So it's very useful when I go to the library and I'm not sure what to read or I'm not sure what to look for next. But I unfortunately usually forget to write down where I heard of the book or what influenced me to want to read it. So anyway, I am immensely grateful to this community that has broadened my reading tastes somewhat to an overwhelming degree, and I can't wait to see how being a part of BookTube continues to influence my reading in the future. So thank you guys for watching this. Thank you to those of you who do influence my reading tastes, whether you were mentioned here or not. Pretty much anyone who ever recommends something to me in the comments section or whose video I write on it, I can't wait to read this book next, or anything like that. You also have influenced my reading tastes. And as someone who does not work in publishing and who does not have a lot of bookish friends around me, it is so helpful to have all of these different recommendations. And it's also sometimes overwhelming to have all of these recommendations from fellow booktubers and book lovers alike. So thank you guys again. I'd love to know in the comments down below, what is the #1 influence in your reading tastes? And until next time, I look forward to seeing you in another video soon. Bye!